Hello everybody, Andy here. As you can see, I am recording in the cinema, which I thought would be pretty fun for today's video, especially because behind me I can have going a adaptation of the film and intellectual property I'm talking about, which is Harry Potter. And today specifically, I want to talk about Dolores Umbridge, the hated character introduced in the 5th book, Order of the Phoenix, and probably the best villain of the whole series. And I want to explore that a little bit today. The question I really want to ask is, why is Dolores Umbridge so hated compared to the worst villain of the series, which is Voldemort? And I think there's a lot of very interesting things that we can learn about ourselves and challenge ourselves with when we examine why we hate Dolores Umbridge so much. So first, I'm gonna pass by a lot of sort of the, I'm not gonna say superficial, but more obvious answers, because there are some more obvious answers, right? One of them is she is a woman compared to Voldemort, and so she is going more against sort of what our societal tropes are for women and how they should act. And even more on top of that, she has this very polite, innocent veneer that she acts very cruelly counter to, right? The pink sweaters, the kittens on the wall, the lots of sugar in the tea, that coughing, all of that represents someone that we would recognize as being kind or gentle, and obviously Dolores Umbridge is anything but that. And then of course we actually have the screen time or page time in the books themselves. Dolores Umbridge probably gets about as much screen time as Voldemort, if not more. I haven't looked up any of the stats, but she's actually on the page interacting with our hero a lot more than Voldemort actually is. So there is actually a lot more time to develop her as a character than there is Voldemort. So there's a lot of sort of obvious on-the-face reasons why Dolores Umbridge is hated more, but I want to focus today on the more interesting perspective, I think, and that is based on what they do, why is Umbridge more hated than Voldemort? Because again, I want to say this from the outset, objectively, Voldemort is a worse guy. He is killing people. I mean, we can pretty much go no further than that. As far as we know, Umbridge has not killed anybody, but Voldemort obviously has, and killed tens of people, hundreds of people. He's trying to create a society that is built on racism or classism, a lot of different terrible things throughout history. He is a proponent for treating people differently based on their bloodlines. I mean, there's horrible things that he is doing. He's the head of this horrible movement, and he's killed our main protagonist, Harry's parents, which is like probably the most personal blow that he has struck against us. I mean, honestly, he is the Hitler of the wizard world, right? He's like the prototype villain. So why, when we think about Voldemort, we hate him, but it's not as visceral, I find, in most Harry Potter fans as the hate for Dolores Umbridge. And this is where I think we want to go back to what has been done to our main character. Harry's parents have obviously been killed by Voldemort, but that happens off screen, happens early. We don't see it. And actually, we don't know Lily and James Potter that well. We have some flashbacks to them, but our main character is Harry. And more importantly, the home that Harry has is Hogwarts, and his friends and the teachers and the environment that he has found at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And so this is going to get to my main point here. The reason that we really hate Dolores Umbridge more than we hate Voldemort is that her misdeeds, her bad actions, her bad faith actions, her destruction is focused on things that we love much more than Voldemort's are, even though Voldemort's actions are bad and terrible in their own right. He is killing people, he's changing society on the outside, whereas Dolores Umbridge is actively fighting against Harry, trying to harm Harry, trying to distance him from Hogwarts School, which is his home. She is destroying and making impossible to live at Hogwarts in the way that we know and love and enjoy. She is hitting us much closer to home than Voldemort is. And this is, I think, not a trivial thing to recognize about ourselves as readers and as humans. We care much more about the evil, or even if not straight evil, the misdeeds done against us in our own, than we care about the greater deeds that, evil deeds that are done outside of us that don't affect us. And this is not a a positive trait, right? This is selfishness in a larger sense. Now, I want to be careful here to say, because I know there's a lot of empaths or people who sometimes are overwhelmed by the evil in the world. We can't fix everything that's wrong in the world. We shouldn't feel like we have to have the obligation or the weight of all the evil in the world. We're just one person, we can't always do that. However, we do need to recognize that we as humans have very limited perspective, and the wrongs and the evils done to us are the ones that get the largest amount of brain power for us, especially when it destroys some things we know, it makes us uncomfortable, it mingles with our everyday life, our home, our rhythm. Those are the things that we view as most evil. Dolores Umbridge versus Voldemort, who maybe isn't affecting us even though he's doing worse things. And I think this is very important to recognize in the areas that are most difficult in our society to change. Things like racism, things like classism and extreme hypercapitalism, and homophobia or hate in general for the LGBTQ plus community. Because a lot of the persecution of those other groups, if you are not a part of those groups, doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect your home, doesn't affect your area, it doesn't affect your everyday life. So while many people can say racism is horrible or talk about the evils of it, they will not take actions against that because it is not a personal slight. It isn't something that affects us in our everyday existence, our home. It's not going to be Dolores Umbridge to us. It's just going to be Voldemort. The problem with that is that many of these ills are society-wide. So if people aren't, as a whole society, not just individuals dealing with it, it will not be dealt with. And it's why these particular issues have been so hard, because it's not, in many people's views, a Dolores Umbridge problem. It is a Voldemort problem. It's not hated and need to be dealt with right away. It is something that's happening out there in the world. There's that famous Martin Niemöller quote that probably you've heard in various forms. He was a pastor, I believe, in Nazi Germany or under Nazi Germany. His famous quote is that first they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the homosexuals. I wasn't a homosexual, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the Jews. I wasn't a Jew, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for me, and no one was left to speak for me. And that is the kind of basic sentiment that we can learn about ourselves when we look at Harry Potter. I mean, this is why I love fantasy literature and literature in general. It reflects back on us our own natures, right? If it's not affecting us, we will not take it up as strongly or as willingly as if it is something that affects us. But before sort of us liberals, as I would say, get too high and mighty, oftentimes this is the case even with people who, on those larger issues, might say the right thing. For instance, you probably have heard of a term called NIMBYism. NIMBYism stands for not in my backyard. And it's a term that I think was coined in Northern California, where obviously there's a lot of liberals, but where there are especially rich and well-off people who want to fix problems like racism and inequality among different classes. But when the solutions to those things affect them negatively, they are against them. So a clear example of this is integration in schools. Lots of people said they were against, racism in the education department, but when that meant that their kid had to go to a slightly less good school, or even that they didn't have to change schools, but that lower income students would come into those schools, they are very much against them. Even in the city I'm a part of right now, Rochester, we're dealing with a problem of we need more low income housing, but no one wants it in their neighborhood. They say it will ruin the neighborhood or there'll be more traffic. And that is a very big example of NIMBYism. So we need to take the lessons we've learned from Dolores Umbridge and expand them out and ask ourselves, are we willing to make Voldemort a Dolores Umbridge question? And that is how the greatest evils will be affected. Hopefully I've given you something to think about. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like it, if you've heard of things like NIMBYism, I'm going to leave you with a great quote by Martin Luther that sums this up well. You've probably heard it before, but I just think it's great. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice anywhere. Thank you guys for watching. As always, first in, last out.